the question for discussion, I would like to share a video with you, because also my colleague Kamil mentioned that he used videos to introduce discussions. I would like to share this video with all of you. Let me access the video here on the website. Yes, this is the video. Let me see if the sound is right.
No, all right. Lady in the second row here was first up.
Professor Bridget Laughlin from University College Dublin. Mr. Farage, I'd like to commend you for your frankness this evening. It was very refreshing, and it exposed to us precisely why you were here and what you were up to. And I say this as an Irish citizen and a voter in the referendum. You are here so that to encourage us to vote no, to create a platform within your own political system, so that under a Cameron-led government, you can actually bring, as you said, European integration or the European project to a halt. The word halt was used. Your frankness is commendable. But can I tell you, you also have an extraordinary lack of sensitivity and knowledge of Irish history. You said that we exchanged subservience to the United Kingdom to subservience to the ECB and the European Union. Nothing could be further from the truth. The person who stood in the GPO on the top was Sean Lemass, and he was the person that brought us in to the European Union. He was the person who established our first application for membership. Why? Because he was an Irish nationalist, and he knew that in the EU, pooling of sovereignty was much, much stronger for a small state. And you may laugh and jeer at Sean Lemass, but you're wrong. The other agendas that are running here, and there are two other from the United Kingdom at the moment. Open democracy is coming to, Open Europe is coming to this country during the week. Open Europe is very clear on the kind of EU they want. They want a looser, a la carte Europe, and they want us to create the conditions for that to happen. And there's also the Trade Union Unite. The Trade Union Unite is basically a British trade union, where if you press on their website, Ireland is listed as a region.
Can I ask you to wrap this up quite quickly?
Yes, I will indeed. We do not want to become a region of the United Kingdom again. We want to be at the heart of the EU. And what is extraordinary is that you and Sinn Féin are on the same side on this. It is to the detriment of this country. And on foreign direct investment, I'm very struck. You have no standing on the Irish economy. Mary Lou MacDonald has no standing on the Irish economy. The employer of the largest number of people in this country, Intel, Jim O'Hara, the managing director of of Intel, the largest employer in this country, has said that it is absolutely imperative that we vote yes.
Okay,
so
I want to give Nigel Farage a quick opportunity to respond. And by the way, if people could keep their questions brief, we haven't got that long.
Well, I assume that you're a Monnet professor, are you? I assume that you're a Monnet professor, are you?
Yeah, I carry that.
Oh, wonderful. So here you are talking about honesty and frankness. Wouldn't it have been rather better if before your question you declared an interest in this and explained to these people that you are one of the many academics throughout the universities of the European Union who is effectively paid to indoctrinate people with a certain line of thinking that we have to adopt a European. I mean, come on, you talked about let's have a bit of honesty. It's a classic symptom of where this European Union has gone wrong, that the attempt to indoctrinate children at university is I was right though, wasn't I?
I've never seen anything like that before. And with any luck, I'll never see anything like it again. Play it again. Oh, right.
Okay. This was the provocative introduction for the discussion. Sometimes I feel that what we do here in these Monnet initiatives, like the project that you do now also, Christian, this EU at School projects, and that we can be accused by people like Farage of trying to do propaganda, trying to indoctrinate people with a certain line of thinking. And I would like to have the opinion by other colleagues that are in the face potentially the same kind of accusations, right? What they think about it, also to make self-criticism, to what extent the fact that you receive funding from an institution such as the European Commission can reduce your academic freedom, your own critical thinking. I don't know. This is the question for discussion with this self-help meeting of Teachers Anonymous, right?
Right. Thank you so much, Diego. I can just second that as a recipient of Jean Monnet funding for many years, probably since I think the first one was in 2008 or 2009. So for many years, I've had that accusation on a number of occasions, notably also sometimes from colleagues who unfortunately weren't successful. So I'm acutely aware, but what I mean, that's just my own personal view, right? But my own personal view is that whether I received the funding or not, I wouldn't have changed the debate. So in that sense, I can safely say for myself and for the events that I've organized, they wouldn't have been any different, except for the fact that perhaps I might have had less of them. So I think in that sense, I didn't get the impression that it really affected what I was saying. But I think Dagmar wants to probably also mention something here.
Yes, so video on again, where's that? Oh, sorry, there we go. Video on again, plus unmuted. So I think this was an absolutely very good example how Brigitte is one of the few people who can take Nigel Farage on. Nigel Farage rhetoric has all the hallmarks of right-wing populist fascist discussion. And if we need to learn anything, then we need to learn to distinguish a proper, honest approach. Sorry, we have this UK thing where the children die off in this household. But I don't spread it by the internet. That's good. So as I've been a Jean Monnet professor for quite a long time, since 2000. Yes, so I'm the carnal sinner here. And I've never had my chair funded by the Jean Monnet program. Actually, the funding is rather laughably small. I still contribute to the program because I think the program as such is worthwhile contributing. Although since I moved to the UK, this was always criticized by my universities because you get 100,000 for 3 years. That doesn't fund me at all. Yeah. It makes me part of a European network. And if you look what the Jean Monnet projects do, there is quite a few, have been quite a few who helped contribute to some of the Brexit rhetoric. There have been projects which contributed to discerning how much the UK actually gets out of the EU. Yeah, and so the projects are impartial. There is no steering on the content because they respect academic independence. Nigel Farage has never disclosed all his funding to the present day. He rather this initiative rather accepted a fine than disclosing the funding for their Brexit camp. Yeah, so I mean that's where we are. So I think these accusations are absolutely holdless. What we need to say is that in all our activities, whether they're funded via the Jean Monnet program or via other programs of the European Union, we need to be transparent. We need to also give out comment on people who have different positions than we have, and we do that. That's what we do as academics.
But my question related to what Christian said, and you also said that this funding has not changed your opinion about the European Union or European integration. But my question is whether the Jean Monnet project selects funding according to this bias, this previous bias. I mean, of course, as an academic, this funding will not change your mind about the European Union. But is it possible that the Jean Monnet project is focusing on those who are less critical of the EU? I
I
mean,
don't think so.
if someone who was analyzing the EU from a more Eurosceptic viewpoint, would she still get the funding for Jean Monnet chair, for instance?
Yes, I do. So Tamara Hervey, for example, has come out to me personally, said, well, I have a pragmatic position to the EU. That was when I first joined Leeds, and I was really, I invited her to some pre-project meeting of one of my Germany projects. And that was what came over was the idea that we need to evaluate the EU on what it brings for the UK. And she has always had Germany funding as long as she was eligible due to being a membership. So that's only one example. So the Germany funding is awarded by academic criteria, and it's also benefits those who have a more skeptical position to the EU. This also, if you look at some of the your Horizon Europe or Horizon 2020 projects, they have been highly Eurosceptical projects. And it's necessary that it is possible to academically base Euroscepticism as well. Yeah, that's what the EU funds, and you can see that if you ever confronted by this, there are every 10 years the Horizon 2020, formerly now Horizon Europe, is evaluated, and there's a summary of all the 8 arts, humanities, and social science things, including the skeptical stuff.
I saw 2 hands up. So there was Kamil, and he did the kind of normal hand, and then there's Sarah with the electronic hand. So I'll take Kamil first because I saw you first, and then Sarah.
Sorry, I'm frantically looking for this electronic hand raising, and I just can't find it. I know it's somewhere here. I just use
reactions at the bottom of your screen.
Okay. Okay. I use Teams all the time, so I'm not that familiar with it. So just a very quick reaction. I think it's a valid point. I think we as academics make a mistake of generally not engaging with those kinds of arguments that Farage expresses because we don't like Farage, but perhaps they may represent a broader sentiment that we perhaps should engage with head on. We shouldn't avoid it and kind of close ourselves in this kind of ivory tower of EU-loving kind of pro-EU academics, etc. But I think there is a kind of valid and a good way to engage with those kinds of criticisms. And you know, and the question, would EU kind of hating or EU bashing academics get Jean Monnet funding? Well, it's a good question. Jean Monnet funding is a form of public diplomacy by the EU, so they perhaps will be more inclined to offer this kind of funding to the projects that are at least somehow sympathetic to the European integration project. At the same time, I find it very unlikely that people who are just in principle disliking the EU, they would be inclined to actually apply for this kind of funding, right? So do they actually want to apply? Now, if they apply, what kind of quality would they be able to produce? Would they be able to actually factually engage with the different aspects of European integration, which they are used to dismissing or kind of just not paying attention to because the audience doesn't care about those facts, right? They care about emotions and some kind of populism. So that's one question. Would they actually be able to produce a good quality application, right? That would not be pure propaganda, but actually would engage with some kind of factual analysis. Now, another question is, do the students get propaganda from us? I mean, my first contact with Jean Monnet funding was when Christian got his Jean Monnet module at the University of Salford, and I was teaching on that module, right? It was a EU simulation. And I was writing that simulation, and there was a lot of EU skepticism in that room, and some students were openly hostile towards the EU. That didn't prevent us from having a discussion, because if you look at the Council of Ministers, you will have political leaders who dislike the European Union in those meetings, right? You will have people, represented officials from countries who are EU skeptic, and we had the same kind of dynamic in that in that room when we were running this simulation. And finally, reflecting on my own funding and my own practice, I don't recall having a single time where students would, even anonymously in the module evaluation surveys, accuse me of spitting EU propaganda, perhaps because I try to keep my values to myself. My modules are on European security governance, and then on the challenges to European integration, which actually links back to the first question: would the EU fund an EU skeptic project? Well, my Jean Monnet chair revolves around two modules: European security governance and imagining European futures. The second module is the one that I discussed in my presentation. And I explained in my application that this module is going to explicitly engage with the challenges to European integration. It's not going to write a love story to the EU. It's going to talk about things like EU skepticism, like migration, like things that are actually challenging to European integration, the things that the EU should be doing different, could be doing different. So it is quite critical in many respects to the way the EU does things. Right, so that would be my kind of very brief response to this.
And Sarah wanted to mention a comment or a question, or
I think that's been covered by both Dagmar and Kamil, really.
okay. Dagmar, did you want to come back in? No. Okay, well, that's fine. I think it's a really interesting discussion to be had, because I actually can say from a neutral observer point of view, while I don't agree obviously with Nigel Farage on his political opinions, I actually wouldn't mind having a conversation with him. I think he's a good speaker and he's quite entertaining to watch. That doesn't mean that I would agree with his political views, but what I would like to ask him though is, in a sense, who funded his financer, because that particular person had an interesting offshore account on some of the British Isles that are not fully part of the United Kingdom, but that are still linked to the United Kingdom, and we can't find out who that person is, although Aaron Banks' wife, as we all know, is Russian. So that is, of course, only merely a coincidence and shouldn't lead us to think of where that money might be coming from. But it is also true that, of course, while she's Russian, MI5 in 2005 thought she was a spy for the Russian government. Again, it was never proven, and so I would not want to say that she was definitely a spy for the Russian government, but MI5 seemed to think she was at that particular moment and wanted to expel her from the United Kingdom. Okay, so much about that. Dagmar, and then Sarah.
Sorry for coming in. I didn't mean to say that we needn't engage with euroscepticism. Of course, we need to engage with euroscepticism. We also need to engage with the reasons for euroscepticism, which derives from open migration policies from the Blair area in the UK, and which isn't matched by investment in regional structures. Yeah. That is not the fault of the EU at all. So what we need to engage in is the extent to which the EU actually makes good on its promise to improve the socioeconomic situation of citizens through integration. And that is a valuable EU criticism, which needs to be aired. I'm not sure this is helped by engaging with the demagogics like Nigel Farage before learning demagogics myself. You made a really good show there, Christian, on saying, no, we do. Of course, they're not Russian funded. I think Michael Dugan has assembled some evidence that they are actually Russian funded. He didn't get a he wasn't sued in court for it. So that's an indication that is perhaps correct. And so so you did the training and engaging with them, so you can invite them to DCU if you like. Yeah, but I think it's more important to engage with the concerns of citizens, of people in and without the EU, who think this is a enterprise which disadvantages them. And that's one of our responsibilities in teaching European Union studies, whether this is law, economics, or politics, or sociology, to take those concerns seriously. And then also to take seriously the shortcomings of the EU in the area, how they actually improve the living and working situation of citizens, as is still promised in, I think, not only the preamble, but also Articles 1 and 2, and later on in the TFEU somewhere.
Thank you. Sarah.
Yeah, just 2 points. There was a point in the chat about the College of Europe and the lack of euroscepticism in its whole. So I don't think that, I mean, I don't know if the lack of euroscepticism is an issue in itself, but I think certainly, I guess you could say that when you speak to people who work for the EU institutions, there is a bit this kind of Brussels bubble. And I think that you have the impression that there isn't always much of an awareness of how the EU is perceived on the ground. And there, I think there's more that the EU could do, because you have the impression that they were taken by surprise, for example, with the Brexit referendum, or the EU membership referendum, rather. And for people living in the UK at the time, actually, it wasn't so much of a surprise, because you could feel there was a strong undercurrent, like, you know, all this kind of vox pops asking people in the streets, or, you know, on TV, you could get a strong sense that a lot of people were going to vote that way. And so there's this disconnect, I think, between the EU institutions and ordinary citizens that need to be addressed. And the second point, actually, it was in a sense that video was kind of making fun of the fact that Bridget was trying to actually speak. And I think that that made me think again about how we are very often, actually, as EU experts, we are not really taking enough part in public debates. And I think it's a bit frustrating, actually, these kind of programs like Question Time, they don't, you know, they really give the floor to people who sometimes really don't know what they're talking about. And I think we saw that a lot in the EU membership in the run-up to the referendum in the UK, that the discussion was of very poor quality. And actually, as academics, it was very difficult to actually being able to contribute to the debate. So to kind of come back in this long way to Diego's point, I think that the Jean Monnet funding is really important. I agree with colleagues that I really don't believe that EU funding, Jean Monnet, all the type of funding is only given to people who are, you know, cheerleaders for the EU. We've seen a lot of projects in some areas. I mean, I work on migration. I've seen a lot of EU-funded projects that were actually very critical what the EU does in the field of asylum and migration. But I think it's really important, because actually in a lot of countries, and certainly was the case in the UK, you could argue it's the case in Ireland as well, there is actually need to fund activities that will teach students, but also society more broadly, about what the EU is, what it does, how it works. And I think it is really important, because if we don't do it, then you can see what happened in the UK, that people can just say anything, really completely crazy stuff, and it works. Like, you know, when you think that some people said they voted for Brexit because they felt that that was the only way of keeping 3-pin plugs. I mean, it was just completely ridiculous. Like, people had all sorts of crazy ideas about the EU, and therefore I think it's very important that I think as Jean Monnet professors, we have a role to play, not to be uncritical cheerleaders, but actually just to
I'm sorry to
knowledge.
interrupt. Can you let Diego Valera in, because he can get in? He messaged me.
Yes, I'll try to let him back in. Yes.
And I apologize.
No problem, no problem. Also, no, I think that very, very valid point. I wanted to also say something else, because in a sense that video with Bridget was already an outline of something that in the Irish context we need to be fully aware, because the Eurosceptics and Nigel Farage as the main culprit, if you like, or at least a symbol for that, they're very, very keen on having Ireland leave the European Union. That is something of one of the main political objectives that they have. I'm not 100% sure whether this has been fully understood by everyone in Irish society, how important. I have the impression there's still an element of, yes, but we're Irish, so we're different to the British, so we're not going to go that route. And I think that's true on the whole. But there's also needs to be said that, you know, Brexit is not innately British either. I think that is something to keep in mind. If we go into the details of that referendum, we can find many, many problems with it. And I think there's nothing inherently British about the Brexit referendum, just as that is definitely a real problem here also in Ireland. And I think the Eurosceptic, if we just look at Dominic Cummings, for instance, he said it very openly. His idea was the Brexit deal is going to work in this particular way. We're going to force Ireland, or basically we're going to force France and Germany to kick Ireland out of the single market and therefore make Ireland leave the European Union. That was their strategy. And he said so in various interviews. So this is something that needs to be taken quite seriously here. Okay, I'll leave it at that point.